You've made your list, you've checked it twice. Welcome to the Intrazone. It's so nice. This is a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet. I am Mark Cashman, here with my co-host, Chris McNulty.
I am Chris McNulty.
You are Chris McNulty. Every time I see you, I look across and I say, that's Chris McNulty.
Every time I look at you, I think, he looks a lot like Mark Cashman.
Well, I'm glad that we are ourselves today. If you couldn't tell already, today is all about lists and a really nice partner with lists, Microsoft Flow, and how they work better together.
So today we'll be talking with Miceile Barrett about all things SharePoint lists and the better together story for how we take lists and you can automate and optimize them with Microsoft Flow.
And Chris, you are a Flow expert, so I'm actually going to be tapping your brain about all things Flow. So we're going to hear from Miceile, and then we're going to hear from Chris, and then you marry those all together, and what happens? You get List plus Flow better together. Before we really get into the depth of what Miceile will share with us about what is the lists features of today, what are they working on next, we really want to give a nice foundation to what are SharePoint lists and what are some of the core fundamental things that people should think about. And I really just want to prompt you about one that's on our list, and then maybe you can describe and tell us a little bit more about it. So the first thing that people should think around lists is they help keep teams organized. Groups of people coming together using lists, why and how?
So lists are essentially a little mini database in the cloud. And I can have anyone set them up. I can add columns for things like dates or currency or status, and I can let anyone who wants to be able to add rows to it, all the way on up to its maximum capacity of 30 million items. You can get to them through the web. You can get to them through mobile. You can build power apps or lists or processes to keep them in line. And we see them get used for lots of purposes. Casual things like T-shirt sizes, all the way on down to tracking the status of relief programs in sub-Saharan Africa.
Very cool, very powerful, and certainly accessible to everybody on the team, right?
Right.
So another mantra, I think, is the way that we can phrase this one, is you should never recreate a list from scratch. True or false?
It's true. We know that most business data still begins life in Excel. And what isn't in Excel is probably already paralleled by something some other team is doing. We've made it easier than ever for you to be able to create a list using either of those patterns. So I can either go directly to an Excel file and import it with all of its columns and bring in all that data, or I can say, show me the lists around my organization that are suggested by Microsoft Graph. And I may see that someone else has a great issue tracking list or a great volunteer sign-up list, and I can use that and automatically get all of those fields and views brought in for me without having to remember to put in city, state, zip, postal, country, etc.
So we want to make teams and individuals more productive. Get started more quickly without the hassle of getting started. So talk a little bit around how lists can be more visually appealing and useful from a formatting and a views perspective.
So views are a great way that I can take exactly the same matrix of data and I can come up with custom filters, custom sorts to make it more personal or at least more tailored to an individual's application. So I might only see the speaking requests that identified me as a reviewer, and I might only sort those by the date of the targeted thing. That way, I can have multiple ways that everyone can have a different window into the information, but making sure everyone's using exactly the same pool of information. With formatting, you can use scripts to be able to add color coding and interactivity to the single values in a column. And with view formatting, I can build these immersive multi-line displays to bring in data from lots of different sources and really be limited only by the power of our imagination for what we want to show there. And we've brought many of those same formatting capabilities forward using a custom format designer. So without writing any of these custom scripts and having to cut and paste from them, you can just say, I want to color code my status values to show high is red, medium is yellow, low is green, and you pick the colors and everything's done for you.
Very powerful, very easy. So easy, even Mark can do it, truly. The next area is, what are we doing with SharePoint lists and teams? And I'm just going to prompt you with 2 true or false questions. First question, if I bring a SharePoint list into Teams, do I have the same capabilities? Is it the same list as I would expect in SharePoint?
It's exactly the same list. So when I'm adding a tab to a channel, I have a picker where I can look at pages and I can also look at lists. And it's going to bring every part of that modern experience over into my view inside Teams. And it's going to extend to the web client, to the desktop clients, to all of the mobile and first-line experiences. Anything that I see and can do inside of SharePoint itself, I can do inside of Teams.
Excellent. So the power of SharePoint true comes into Teams. So if you bring a list into Teams, you shouldn't expect it to be a lesser than capability.
Absolutely not.
So true or false, is the list a copy when it moves into Teams?
That's false. It's exactly the same list. It's a different window into exactly the same data and experience.
Excellent. So no matter where you're working with that list, whether you did bring it into Teams or you're using it on your mobile device or you're going directly into the SharePoint user interface, the data is the same, the list is the same, and the capabilities are the same, which is wonderful.
Unless it's being used by Schrodinger's cat, yes.
And the last thing is just your opinion on, do people have in the service or even now in SharePoint 2019 lists greater than 5,000 if people think there's that 5,000 limit?
It's not true. This is fact. There's lots of really large lists that we see across our tenants and customers. We hear stories about them all the time. People use them to grab social information, to let people register, to keep track of customer issues. Anything that you can imagine that could generate thousands and thousands and thousands of inquiries can be housed inside of a list, all the way up to our maximum capacity of 30 million. I know you're going to be asking Miceile later on about how we do that magic, and I think our audience will be really pleased when they hear what she says.
Pleased that they stepped up to tackle that problem, because it was a tough problem, and really nice in the way that we're already beyond it and even moving beyond it, what we learn and how people are using lists at scale. The two things I wanted to talk about that are most recent for me working with lists is a demo that I've been having fun doing and actually how we're prepping for SharePoint Conference 2019. So one of the lists that I do for demos is I use the locations list, and I've done two recently, one about the best pizza place on the East Coast, and I chose 3 cities. And of course, the demo is to show the locations, how that works, type in a name, populates the fields. But then I've also, from a choice perspective, used the different cities to show the different color on that column. And then I bring it all into Microsoft Teams, and I've got this beautifully formatted locations list to make half the people in the crowd mad at me because I chose one city or over the other as the best place to get pizza on the East Coast.
Do you know what the answer is?
I have to say Chicago, but maybe Boston. No, probably with you, I should say Boston.
Nope. The best pizza on the East Coast is in New Haven, Connecticut at a place called Pepe's.
Ooh, I'll put it on my list.
Yes.
So if anybody out there agrees with Chris,
Ooh, garlic white clam pizza.
send him lots of kudos on Twitter. If you disagree with Chris, please, please, please send him a lot of Twitter traffic about what you think is the best pizza on the East Coast. The other list that's been getting, of course, a lot of attention as we prepare for SharePoint Conference 2019 is our speaker list. So we've got a lot of sessions that we've allocated to both MVPs, internal speakers, and, of course, our engineering counterparts. And we're all working across ways to gather that information. What are the right sessions? Who are the right speakers? Do we have too much of this, too much of that? What are going to be the big announcements? And, all of that. So as we're going through, we have a really healthy list now of all the sessions that we've proposed and all the sessions that have been proposed externally and now coming from our engineering team. That's where we're at now. And then we'll munge those all together, see where the duplicates are, and start assigning who is going to speak, when that would be best in the part of the week, early, late,
Right.
And certainly the levels, 100 to 400.
One of the things I wanted to point people toward is some other examples of things people have done with lists. We stand up a lot and we talk about fun examples like, hey, you want to get people's T-shirt sizes for the company picnic. And morale is definitely a key part of how you organize a company. But one of my roles at Microsoft is I oversee our Business Apps Partner Program. And our partners submit case studies to us, which we then share and publish. So I get to see lots of real-world stories. And there's some great stories of how lists get used and extended with Power Apps and Flow in manufacturing or in travel or in field service events. We see it a lot in retail. The one I just reviewed a case study from one of our partners in the UK, Intelligy, which we'll be sharing this month on the Tech Community site, relates to the national health. Now, in Hertfordshire and a couple of surrounding counties, National Health has had a process in place where if you're a clinician and one of your patients calls up and says, I have these symptoms, I think I have the flu or something, you have to tell them where to go. And how you tell them where to go is based on your understanding of not just the services available at each facility, but how many beds are available. And until recently, the way that they knew how many beds were available was literally someone in each office was daily calling around to all the other offices to find out how many beds there were. So lots of information, lots of things out of date. What our partner was able to get National Health to do, was create one central list to keep track of available beds at each facility. And so each facility will just update with available services and available capacity so that when that clinician is sending a patient to a facility, they're not sending someone to a hospital which, unbeknownst to them, has become full since the last phone call. They've got a current view of what the load is, so they make sure they're not inadvertently having a patient go to multiple facilities. They can get them directly aligned to care immediately. And that's probably a lot more essential than getting the right T-shirt size for people.
Or the best pizza on the East Coast.
Oh, depending on how hungry you are, that can be life and death.
Now, that's a really nice story, and it's obviously a really wonderful thing to know how lists are being used by our customers and our partners. And lists, when they're obviously used for good, even better.
Yes. So, a lot to get through today. We're going to be talking about lists with Miceile Barrett. And then later on, we'll have a special guest, you, to talk about Microsoft Flow.
Yes, Chris is an in-house expert about Microsoft Flow. We think the two topics are very important. So we have an expert on lists, Miceile, and we've got an expert on Flow, Chris.
So let's get ready for Miceile Barrett to talk to us about lists on the Intrazone.
We are lucky today to have in studio to share a lot about what the SharePoint engineering team is doing with SharePoint lists and all the things that they're integrated with. Miceile Barrett, who is a program manager focused on lists and probably a ton of other things.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm Miceile Barrett. I've been on the SharePoint Team Sites team for just over 2 years, 2 years and 3 months, I think. And in that time, I joined and was working on the library and list experience. And over the last 2 years, I've been really working on getting our modern story completely coherent with what the classic experience looked like and bringing some new functionality to the list experience to make it easier to use, faster to use, and much more visually appealing so that you can find your content quickly. In addition to the list and libraries, I've done a lot of work on the team sites, on the homepage, and ways that we can get more users getting to the most successful scenarios of their team sites quicker. But my main focus has always been on list and libraries. I find them fascinating. And I've always had a focus in the metadata area, ways that you can create metadata faster, get it into your list faster, and then ways that you can use that metadata to make your lists even more effective.
So you joined the SharePoint team. What was the actual very first thing that they said, Miceile, we want you to do X? Where did you actually start? What was your first SharePoint thing?
My first feature is one that I've gotten a lot of feedback on. It was the filters pane. So when I joined the Team Sites team, we had just shipped Modern in 2016, and we had this dashboard that was created. It was one of our first dashboards that we made where it showed what is preventing our users from actually going into Modern. And the hottest topic that was right there was metadata navigation. And so in the classic experience, people had really extravagant taxonomy and metadata term store set up. And when you went to Modern, you had no way to filter on that content. So the first feature that I built was a way to get rid of the metadata navigation experience and modernize it into the modern world that we were creating. And when I was playing around with it, I was completely new to that experience and noticed a lot of redundancies. So we had key filters, and we had the key filters and then being able to apply. And they were very redundant across the different fields that you had in the list. And so the features that we built took out that redundancy and added a little bit of smarts behind it so that the admin wouldn't actually have to configure that view. Everyone just gets it automatically. And then we made the filters pane customizable so that you can add different things that you want to pivot your data on. And then one of the highlights for that feature for me was when we actually shipped it and got to see, the 1.6 million users that we had stuck in Classic being able to actually go over to Modern and start using the list and library experience just because they were able to filter on their content. So that was the first 6 months I was on the team. And it was a great project because it really got me super deep into the metadata scenario and really understanding how have people been using lists in the last 20 years and what's the best way that we can make them even faster and more interesting.
I remember when the pane showed up, not only did it just feel modern, I know the way that you used to filter lists and obviously some of the issues that you listed, but I also think it just felt new, gave a lot of great accessibility, for people to be able to just achieve the thing. And I bet for your role, it gave you the first underpinnings of, this is not an outlier feature. This is a pretty core aspect. Lists in general.
Absolutely.
That aspect.
And, when I was looking at it, one of the things that really was just surprising to me was that when you used manage metadata navigation, it was only on the very far left side. So as soon as you scrolled, it would go away. So if your list wasn't long enough or if you wanted to see the header still, you actually had to keep scrolling up and down on the page. And so that was a huge annoyance when I was trying to use the feature just for my daily work. And so as we were building that feature, it was one of the top priorities of not even functionality, just basic usability of being able to see your filters as you're looking at your content.
So you assume people don't just create lists, they actually use them.
Exactly, yes.
That's great. So we're going to filter down on a lot of things to use your first feature. Before we get into sort of the nuts and bolts of lists, I know one thing about you that I think would just be fun for our audience to know. You were selected to go to Africa, and I believe that the program was called MySkills for Africa.
Yep.
That took you to Kenya. You were on a panel for women in technology of Kenya, and you visited a lot of places. But just a quick summary, how you got chosen, what you learned there, and then we'll go deep into lists.
Absolutely. So this is a philanthropy program that Microsoft has been doing for about the last 5 years. And when I had joined, I was a virtual volunteer for the MySkills for Africa program. And I would mentor women out of Swaziland. And the role was pretty minimal, maybe 2 hours a week at the most. And it was really helping girls who were similar to my age, just graduating college, maybe have a master's degree, and they didn't know how to write a resume or go through interviews. And so really just helping them walk through my experience at Microsoft and prepping them for those scenarios. So after I did that for about a year, the program offered to do a in-country volunteer program, and I wanted to do something that was related to what I do for work, which was in SharePoint. And so the location that I was assigned was in Nairobi, Kenya. And the point of this project was to drive to one, get the product team into the Microsoft Kenya office and let the product team there see what is it like in Redmond, what do we do, let me see what they do, and then actually meet with their customers there. And so the customers that had the highest SharePoint usage get some of their feedback, really help them onboard, and so it was a really hands-on experience. So I went down for about 18 days, and I spent 2 solid weeks working with the SharePoint customers of Nairobi. And the first part of the project was actually to work with one customer who had about 5,000 seats, and they owned the entire telecommunications across most of Eastern Africa. And when I went there, I gave my first presentation, and it was a pretty in-depth scenario on flow and ways that they can leverage that in their day-to-day tasks. A lot of things were done by paper, and ways that they can just get that moving online. And people in the room were just completely dumbfounded by what we were doing in this modern experience. They hadn't seen anything past 2013. And the mentor that I had in the program said, I actually have 6 other customers that would love to see this exact presentation. And so my goal there kind of pivoted, and I started meeting with the other customers in the area. And so it totaled to be about 40,000 SharePoint users.
Whoa.
Which was, huge, all in Nairobi, extremely reliant on SharePoint to get their day-to-day tasks done. And the biggest complaint they had was that a lot of stuff was still done on paper, and it was actually faster to do it on paper than it was to do it on 2010 on-prem or 2013 on-prem. So then when I give them the demo of what we're doing in 2016 and beyond and some of the flows that we had that were super easy to set up, it was a kind of an entire shift in the attitude of the rooms here, where it's like, well, we're already paying for this service. Let's get it implemented. Why aren't we doing this? And so while I was there, I was one of the only women that have ever done this program, especially in a country. And I was asked to sit on a panel for women in technology in Kenya. And so that was a panel that was during a session for the Internet of Things. It was a mini conference that was being held, sponsored by a couple of different tech companies in the area. And then they separated and had a panel where women who were interested in the field could speak to women that were in the field. And so I was sitting on the panel, and I represented a little bit more of the younger people that have gone through the internships and my first 2 years as a career and what I expected and how I got into this environment. And it was really inspiring because the questions that I received there were very different than what I've received in America and from universities like ones I went to or ones I've spoken at.
Some of the assumptions of who has used technology, who has even access to it, maybe even allowed to do it.
Yes. So the main question that really kind of stuck out to me was why do you have a man's job? And that was the question that I got asked over and over again when I was in Kenya, whenever I was speaking to women who were under the age of 21. And I would just ask, well, did your brother teach you how to use a computer? Why do you have a man's job? And, my response every time was, it's not a man's job. It's my job. It could be your job, too. Like, computers aren't just for boys.
Yeah, watch this inspiration. This next year's topic is going to be the SharePoint of things, not the internet of things.
Yeah. And
Very cool.
So I thought that it was a really great opportunity, and it also exposed me to a whole other subset of SharePoint users. Really inspiring to see that on the other side of the world, we have such a fan base. There's not a single MVP in Nairobi, Kenya. And so I think that needs to change to whoever's listening.
Yeah, we should put up something on the internet and the social world saying, look, we know you're out there.
Yeah. And there's a SharePoint Saturday in Nairobi about 3 years ago now. And so I think that also needs to change.
That's a good idea. Well, we'll talk to our friends in the SharePoint Saturday group and say, Nairobi, how about doing that again?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Microsoft Kenya, the Microsoft initiative, I think is at For Africa, which I think is related to what you were doing.
It's For Africa, and the program's MySkills for Africa.
MySkills for Africa. Okay, we'll put all that in the show notes. I think it was great that you went, certainly to support it. I knew that it wasn't just going to be about SharePoint, but I remember internally hearing that Miceile is going to Africa, and that was a really cool, not to just share SharePoint out, but obviously a lot of the other things that you did.
Absolutely.
So are you ready to go into deeper SharePoint? I thought we would start with the basics and then move through sort of our recent announcements, what you can do most currently, and then get your thoughts on the future.
Absolutely.
So you give a lot of talks on lists and libraries, and I know sometimes you frame it into what's new with team sites, which of course house lists and libraries.
Yep.
And you've given sessions, on your own. You've given sessions with Adam Harmitz, who we've had on the show before. And you focus on the fundamentals. If you think about the basics with lists, just honing in on lists, what do you train people on? What do you tell people who maybe aren't deep on SharePoint lists?
One of the first things when I'm demoing at these sessions is to always land on a list that has a lot of really visually appealing things going on. And I like to start there because it captures the attention of people in the room who have either, one, never really used lists before, and then it also gets the attention of people that have used lists for years. And they're like, well, how did that happen? Was this behind-the-scenes 3-day project that you hired an engineer to do? And so then I kind of like to start there and then take the next, 10 to 15 minutes and actually just build it again and show that this is how you can get these customizations done. This is how you can input the data. This is how you can, edit things really quickly. And I find that to be a pretty impactful way to go about it because it captures the attention of people, like you mentioned, that aren't exposed to SharePoint, who might look at a SharePoint list and say, this just looks like Excel, but crazy. And then it kind of breaks it down into ways that they can actually use it. And so a couple of the things that I've been really liking to highlight this year include the column formatting that we have. And we announced the new easy column formatting where with literally a click of a button, you can get it customized. But of course, you could still use the JSON blob that we've released in the last 2 years.
I can't tell you how many times I went just for demos and grabbed a JSON blob because I'm not that type of person. But I love when you have a certain column type where you can actually just manually choose your colors.
Absolutely.
And, adjust them as you would without having to know or grab somebody else's JSON.
Yeah, it makes it super easy. And so that's supported on the date column, the choice fields, and like Mark describes it, literally is a click of the button, which makes it super easy. And then I also like to really point out some of the out-of-the-box flows that we're creating. Because I think that flow and workflow have kind of had a pretty scary connotation in the last few years. And so showing that right now I haven't built anything behind the scenes in this demo. I'm actually just clicking on what it will look like for you when you open up your SharePoint list with one item. It's a really powerful thing to demo, to say that this is how you can do a lightweight approval. This is how you can set reminders. And then also kind of opens that door to say, well, what else can you do with Flow, right? If you're able to do this super easily, what else can you do? And so I always love showing off those things that are coming because it makes it It makes it really exciting on what you can possibly do.
Do you use the word customize a lot still, or sometimes in the vernacular just the word configure? Or you say use as it is, use out of the box? Because I think a lot of the classic view was, I can kind of put items in a list, but if I really want it to be usable, functional, I have to hire a developer, like you'd mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's a great distinction to make. I would say that it's definitely shifting where I'm using this word customize, but it's something that you can do as an end user. So I think you're doing a great distinction there, where it's not the customization that we've seen in the last 5 years, where you do need to hire someone who's an expert in this area. These are things that you do not need an IT pro for, and I actually would even encourage the person creating the team site who's not even involved in IT to be able to do these things on their own. So they are customizing the list, but it's almost a very out-of-the-box feel, because you're not needing to know code for it. You're not needing to know the history of SharePoint's last 20 years to be successful, which makes everyone really powerful when they're doing this, especially with the ease of actually just creating a SharePoint site and list right now, that we're not telling people that you need to create a list that you're going to be using in 3 years from today. It could be something that maybe you only have a 2-week project. Create a list. Use it for that time. It's super easy now.
So one of the things that I know that I still think is in kind of the basics, but it's very new and certainly something that we announced at Ignite. But I remember it because it surprisingly got some of the biggest claps during Jeff Teeper, CVP engineering, in your world, in my world too, was the bringing in an Excel spreadsheet to create a list.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, obviously how you're thinking about building that, to then the usability of it, and then maybe some of the other things of how people can more quickly create lists.
Yeah, absolutely. So what Mark mentioned is being able to import a list from Excel. And this was a request that we'd been hearing for a very long time. And we were super excited to actually be able to demo it, where you can go into basically the site contents and create new, and then you can pull it in from an Excel spreadsheet. And so this is something that we're hoping to release in the next few months. This is a very early version of it. The things that we really want to nail down in this scenario are, when you're importing from Excel, they're not the exact same data structures as what you have in SharePoint. And so really aligning with what that means when you're going between Excel and SharePoint is the story that we want to flesh out and make sure that it's, 1, intuitive, 2, easy to use, and 3, that it just works without the end user really needing to do much. And then we'll also have an experience that we'll be releasing at the same time where you can import a list from a list. And so this is a huge time saver, where I personally was very excited to get flighted for this well before it was ready, just because I know that I create so many lists that I want to reuse, where it's not even the content inside of it. It's literally just the columns I've created and any views that I have, and being able to just say, let's start from there. And then I don't need to go through and actually click add column, and it takes out a lot of time. And so those are 2 scenarios that I'm super excited to get into the hands of our customers.
So one other feature that I know we mentioned that I personally have been demoing a lot, just because it's kind of fun to put some scenarios around it, is the location column.
Yes.
I'd love to hear kind of the tech behind it. The idea being I can type in a location, does a Bing map lookup, and voila. But what really is going on, and how, did you think about building it for users?
Absolutely. So the location column is really exciting because it's the first time that we've built a new field in SharePoint in a while. And the best part about this location column is that when you actually type in an address, it'll automatically fill out about 13 other properties associated with that address. And then by just clicking or hiding on the, being able to show or hide when you look through that location column, you can decide if you want to actually populate your list with those metadata properties on the location. So for, to be super straightforward here, if you type in the Microsoft headquarters location, you're going to get the zip code and the latitude and the longitude automatically pulled out and added as kind of like a piece of the metadata of that location. And so you can then add the zip code into your view based on the location column, and that's going to work as a real column. So you can drag and drop it, you can do all the visual things we're used to, but the real power comes from being able to pivot on that. So say that you add, your team's adding all the addresses, And then you actually want to pivot and say, well, which region are we in? So you can go through and find the state, you can find the zip code, you can see which one is there and even group by it and save the view so you always have that populated.
True or false, I go in and I select that I want to use the location column. I have to go in and add that column. After that, everything you just mentioned, state, city, zip code, longitude, latitude, I don't actually have to manually go in and say, and I want this, this, and this to come in. It just is there.
It's just there. Yep. And so it makes it really awesome because a lot of times you don't even think about it. One of the things that I absolutely love showing off, and I think most people have probably seen this demo by now, but I absolutely love it, is using the location column to be the source for an embed web part so that you can actually start using composite apps with lists. I'm kind of jumping way outside the scope of location column here.
We announced it, and it was something we definitely wanted to tie into, which is how do you use lists to basically populate other web parts?
Exactly. And the location column ones that I love to talk about because there's so much going on behind the scenes that you don't need to know about to just get things to work, which I personally love that as an end user where you sit there and you're like, I don't need to see the latitude and the longitude, but I do want to know where it is on a map. And so you can add the location column to a list, and then you can hook that list up to an embed web part or a maps. You can hook it up to the properties. And if you hook it up to the embed with the maps, you can actually then see the locations when you select that item. And so if you go through and you're going through the scenario of, let's pivot by states, and then you go through and you actually want to see where in the state are they, you can just have a side-by-side comparison right there on the page. And it's super easy because you don't need to see the latitude and longitude. That doesn't really mean much to someone reading the numbers. But since the location column is doing all of that in the back end for us, it can populate the map super easily. And so I think it takes maybe 5 clicks to set this whole thing up, including adding the location column, which is just a really powerful tool. And it also kind of gets the gears turning on. What else can I do with this map, right? What else can I get going here? And how do I make this list even more powerful?
I think it's a very powerful thing, and it's something that would have taken a developer a lot of time to set up. Not just list to other web part, but just all the underpinning things that you've all taken care of.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I would tell our listeners, if you want to learn a little bit more about what Miceile's talking about, just look up dynamic data for web part to web part integration. And she's highlighting one scenario. There's a couple that we showcased during Ignite. So if people want to learn more, it's also a side of things where a developer, if you build any custom web parts, you can now start to build in those SharePoint framework hooks to be aware of, from one web part to the next.
You're bringing up a great point here. That also works very well with lists specifically. So when you're building a really great example of a super customized web part is something that shows more detail on the people within a company. And so then when you click on a list item, whichever person field then immediately populates that custom web part that you've built for your company, showing all the details pertinent to the relevant people to that list item. And so I love that scenario because you get the visuals, you get the information immediately, and it gives what the company needs, right? We have a people card, but it's not redundant because companies want to show different things. So it gives a lot of information that's really valuable. And then the other scenario for hooking those up is actually getting the list to hook up to a properties web part, which is really powerful because you can actually go in and edit that list right there on the page. And it functions similarly to the properties that you see when you right-click on a list item, but it's all right there. And so it makes it really fast and easy to see. And you can see the list changing as you're updating the properties. And so those are the being able to do some of the map stuff, being able to embed any custom web part and hook it up to the list, and then being able to actually change the properties right there when you need them to are awesome uses of composite apps and the dynamic data.
So you are still just echoing that your intention is to make lists easy to use.
Absolutely.
Adding items, editing items, sharing them, viewing them.
Yeah, we got a lot of feedback that the part-to-part communication was debilitating to not have in modern. It's something that once you have it set up and start using, it's really challenging to take that away. And instead of just building what we had, we really wanted to take a stab at making it extremely easy to set up and use and very transparent so that you know exactly what you're doing.
There's one more pretty important integration, and I know that this capability has actually been there, but you now have made it a lot easier to bring lists into Microsoft Teams as a tab. What's that flow look like to get a list from SharePoint into Teams?
Absolutely. The whole goal that we have with Teams is that if that's where actually, Mark did a great talk on this at Ignite, where there is no Teams versus SharePoint. It's yes to both.
That's right. And always yes. It's and, never or, never but.
Exactly. It's yes to both. And what does that actually mean? That means that if you want to use Teams, you need to be able to get the full functionality of SharePoint in there, and we can't expect you to have to be navigating between the two of them to get different functionalities. And so being able to add a list as a tab and have it be a full functioning list within that Teams tab was just, a huge milestone for making Teams functional for our SharePoint users. And so the experience that Mark brought up is you can go in and just as you would add a planner tab or as you would add a page, you could go in and actually add the list that you want. And then when you get it there, you can do everything that you're used to doing. So you can actually start using those out-of-the-box flows I mentioned. You can use the custom flows that you created. All of your formatting will show up. All your view management. You get that full list experience, and it's quick. It is not something that's being iframed in on top of something that's native to the desktop. It's fast, which makes it actually usable for our customers.
Yeah, there are some of those features, especially in the early days. Usually in the middle, and it's been around for a couple of days. This isn't true, but in the early days, you think, maybe I won't demo that. That seems a little slow. I only have 5 minutes.
Right.
This is really easy to go all the way from left to right. Add the list. Show up, do a bunch of stuff. My favorite thing to end on, which I think really just then adds what's the value of Teams, okay, I can see my list and it's the full functionality, is how many times have you ever in the past been able to have a list and side by side the conversation?
Yes.
Where the list lives where it lives and does what it does, the conversation lives where it is and does what it does, but literally side by side, instead of sending an email with the link that says check this out, you literally can have them side by side.
And that's so powerful. Personally, I find that to be a great use of ways that you can interact with your list more. Because it's pretty unrealistic to expect people to be sending emails and links with it. So having that conversation right there. And then, of course, it's not, once you put that list into Teams, I want to reiterate that it is not separating, that you're not creating a fork in your list at all. So if, 20 people on your team want to keep using the list in SharePoint, but, 10 want to have it in Teams, it's the exact same experience that's updating in real time. So there is no forking of the two. You don't need to pick, which just gets back to that. There is no or, there's always and. And so that experience is a really powerful one, especially because you can get, lists can get huge, of course. And so being able to put all of that goodness right into Teams where people are working is really powerful.
So one more now question. It's a little bit more of a summary of everything we've been talking about up to this point. When somebody asks you, what's the value of lists in both SharePoint context, or if people are just like you talked with a lot of people in Kenya who are Office 365 customers but didn't know about this component, how do you summarize the value that lists brings in the context of productivity tools?
Absolutely. And that's, bringing in the Kenya, it's funny too, where I get asked a lot, well, it's just Excel. And I get asked that from people that don't use SharePoint a lot. And they say, well, it's just Excel. Why would I not just create an Excel spreadsheet? And I always like to highlight a couple of things here where, one, our data containers are amazing. So things like the location column, things like the people field, choice columns, being able to actually have those containers for your data and then being able to view it in a way where you can access that data is really powerful. We touched upon this, but maybe I didn't do a great summary of it, but that location column is one of the most visually easy ways to understand that, where you'll get those 8 to 13 different metadata fields all contained within that single piece of data. And then you can easily filter by it, sort by it, arrange it any way you want without ever having to put in the data. And the person field is another great example of that, where you just type in the name of your coworker. And if you want to immediately send an email to them or kick off a flow or ping them somehow, you can do that all within your SharePoint list because you just hover over their name and the container supports all of that. So that's a huge selling point for lists that make them extremely powerful. In terms of productivity, the ability to kick off flows on them makes it a very productive tool that allows you to do a lot of things that help you get your stuff done. So the two out-of-the-box flows that I mentioned was setting a reminder and then being able to kick off kind of a lightweight approval flow. And those are two that just come with your list automatically.
Everything that you've been talking about essentially is, whether it's users or power users or maybe even at the admin level or developer, it's the cornerstone to a lot of solutions. There's a ton of scenarios. There's lots of things that, even if we talk about the horizontal, what it can do, when it gets to people going, I know I could use that for X or Y or Z, that's an endless list. And I think a lot of the work that you and your team are doing is to make sure that when you go to build that easy solution, like you said, for a couple of weeks, or an application that lives for several years, lists are foundational to that.
Yep, exactly.
There was an internal memo that I have read, I believe you probably wrote it or were a part of writing it, was 2019 Year of the Lists.
Yes.
And there's a lot that we can't share at this time, and that's okay. There's a lot that we'll share, certainly at some upcoming moments with the SharePoint conference in May and Ignite later in the year in November. But if you were to summarize, we've gotten a lot of this feedback. We've released X and Y that we've talked about. How do you think about what we're doing for lists v. next?
The way that I would summarize that is really making lists something that people want to use, not just something that they think they'd need to use. And some of the ways that we've done that is what we've talked about today, where you can easily get some out-of-the-box flows. You can add the visuals that you want there. Even simple features that we kind of take for granted now, but things like being able to drag and drop your columns to reorder them really easily and quickly, and being able to actually go in and save your column widths, and just little things that we haven't been addressing in the last decade that now we feel like we really need to get that polish out there for our customers. And it kind of scales, right, from things as custom flows and really powerful power apps, and then all the way back down to just being able to have the column size adjust and save. I think that creates a whole picture that makes the lists just a really positive experience that people want to be using, and that they're easy to use. It's not, you don't need training to use them anymore.
So another way to look at the future, true or false? Is your job going to be boring and you're going to be kicking and twiddling your thumbs in 2019?
False. You have given me lots of requests out there.
Good. So the backlog is healthy. Customer feedback is healthy. MVPs and partner requirements probably healthy too.
It's healthy, but it does not mean stop giving feedback. We love it.
Yeah. So that was fun to talk about that.
Before we move on, Mark, I want to make sure that everyone knows of a couple new features that we have coming out that we've demoed, but I really want to reiterate. And those would be sticky headers for the column headers, so that when you scroll through your list, you can actually see
what was the name of this column again? Oh, my God.
Exactly. And then column totals are now supported in Modern, and then an autosave for the view, so that when you navigate away, you don't immediately
I've done all
everything.
This work. It looks great today, and I come back tomorrow and it reset back.
Absolutely. So those are features that we've demoed, and you've seen them out there, and we're excited to get them into the hands of customers as quickly as possible.
Great. Nice to be up to date here on the Intrazone.
Yeah.
Thank you. So if people want to know more about what you're working on, whether it's you as a person, you as a SharePoint list maker, or whatever, where can people find out more about you and what you're working on?
Absolutely. To find out about me, my Twitter handle is Microsoft's Miceile. So just at MSFT, MICEILE. And I usually post there about any cool trips I have going on with SharePoint, or any conferences I'll be speaking at. To find out about the features we're shipping, the Message Center is a great place to look for what's coming and when. And then our blog posts on Tech Community are a huge resource to get screenshots and maybe even a couple videos on what's going on. I'm pretty active on Tech Community, so if you shoot me a mail or even tag me in a blog, I'll be on there, and I'll be checking it.
So We'll put that all in the show notes and make sure that people can, follow you. They can read your stuff, and if they have a question, they know where to ask it.
Sounds good.
So, Mark, it was great to be able to hear your interview with Miceile, to really get an engineering perspective on all the things that we've done and will be doing soon with lists.
So Miceile is out of the hot seat. Are you ready for the hot seat?
I am ready.
I'm going to shine a big spotlight here on our friend Chris McNulty.
I am ready.
And we're going to go all into Microsoft Flow. So Flow is the new kid on the block, and the way that we've been integrating it with SharePoint lists and libraries means there's a lot native about Flow that we use in the context of pre-built flows or ways that people can get into Flow really quickly. So let's focus on the breadth of where and how Flow can be used in the context of SharePoint. First, what do you think the real philosophy is in why are we doing this?
So let's take one step back and talk about what Flow is in the first place. So Flow is Microsoft's cloud-based service for automating and processing information across a range of over 200 cloud and on-premises-based services. We see Flow used for lots of business purposes, but the four most common ones are to get an alert or some sort of awareness that something has happened or changed, to be able to copy data based on conditions from one place to another, to be able to get new information from people in the context of a workflow process, and increasingly we're seeing it used for approvals. Something has happened or something has changed, and we need to get people to buy in and approve or reject that before we can continue to the next step. So at a high level, that's Flow's mission, and it extends beyond SharePoint, beyond Office 365, and even beyond Microsoft to be able to plug into Azure application services that live in the cloud and make them ways that anyone can build a process without having to write any code. There's a separate aspect of Flow, which is called Logic Apps, and Logic Apps are using the same plumbing, but it's where a professional developer can use the same tools and techniques, but to build a process that's intended to be run tens of thousands or millions of times a day. Flow is built a little bit differently, and it's really focusing on the usability and the extensibility into information workers' lives. And that's a big reason why in the SharePoint team, we've taken a heavy reliance on Flow. As we've made the transition to cloud, there are some legacy tools like SharePoint Designer, which were used on premises and can still sort of be used in the cloud, but we've deprecated them. The technology is limited. It's not expanding. It lets me talk to things like SQL and to WCF and to SharePoint itself and Exchange, and that's just about it. And we know that the numbers of services out there are growing exponentially, and people have lots of systems that they need to tie in and integrate. And Flow allows us to put a very lightweight wrapper around all of those things, and it makes a lot of sense for us to be able to use that as the basis for delivering processes to the user inside of SharePoint.
Yeah, I've always thought of something like SharePoint Designer was the product we built in the past to do a very certain thing, and it was very limited, obviously, in the scope of what it could talk to and how it could orchestrate. And with Flow as a service, meaning it's an endpoint that you can call from pretty much anywhere, and I think we've done some wonderful work in SharePoint and how to make it meaningful for lists and libraries, but to know that there's life beyond means Flow just keeps getting better and better, not just with our requests, what does the SharePoint team want it to do based on what our customers are asking for it to do, but that there are just a lot of things, connectors, methods, ways of connecting and pulling information back in that just make it so that Flow gets better for everybody with a lot of different integration points, meaning, it'll get better for lots of different solutions and scenarios.
So let's talk a little bit about the structure of a flow. So a flow is built from two sets of things. The first is a trigger, which are the reasons why we're starting this process in the first place. And the second are the actions. So the triggers can be one of two things. They can either be based on a dynamic condition. You've uploaded a file to SharePoint, and anytime I upload a new file, I may want to trigger an alert to someone, or I may want to trigger an approval. And it's those things like an alert, an approval, a process. Those are all the actions, and they can connect to lots of data sources. So that's why we see Flow getting used to bridge information. I may be looking at a Salesforce tool, Salesforce itself, or Dynamics. If something has happened in that system, a customer has gone from a prospect to being an official customer, they bought the product, I might want to trigger an onboarding process to send them an email, to drop information about them into a SharePoint library, to send an alert to the team, to make a welcome phone call to them, all the things that I want to make sure that I'm standardizing. Those are all the actions. Now, how do I build those? First, you don't have to build a lot of these things from scratch. When we're talking about lists, we're talking about reusing structures. Flow is based on the idea of templates. So there are dozens of templates for SharePoint alone. There are dozens for OneDrive. There are, I think, thousands of templates that are already published. So there's already a recipe, if you will, for saying if you want to reach out to information that's coming from Twitter or information that's coming from forums, or if based on weather conditions, all kinds of things that are already out there. So the first thing you need to do if you have a process to automate is see if there's already a template for it. Working with Flow, There's lots of ways to plug into it. Flow is a web-based tool, so you can go directly into your browser. We have mobile clients for it, so I can build and monitor my flows from the comfort of my own phone. We've also extended that directly into SharePoint. So if I'm inside a list or I'm inside a library and I want to build a new process around the documents in my library, I can just pull flow down from the command bar, say, I want to build a new flow. And you get an option of building something from scratch or looking at some of the templates that are out there.
One of the things that opened my eyes really to start to address not so much what was flow, I got it. It was going to be our workflow replacement and our onward going and how people build off of lists and libraries. But it was the Flow mobile app. At first I shook my head thinking, how are people going to build flows on their mobile app? What's that? Then I got smart because somebody whacked me on the backside of the head and said, no, these are really more like click this button to get a flow to do something for you personally. Anytime you receive an email in a meaningful way, do X. And you can just make some choices, and then that flow is running for you as an individual based on me signed in as an Office 365 user. I know there's a lot beyond Office 365 that it can do, but it's really just that. I want something that is already, like you said, like a template, but to then happen off of my actions, my meetings, my mail, my documents, whatever.
Right, and you can trigger a flow based on your own interaction. We talked before about a trigger might be I've uploaded a document to a SharePoint library. Well, if I'm going to be co-editing that document, there will be lots of versions, and I may want to get an approval, but I don't want to get an approval every time someone edits the document. I want to wait until I've decided it's, quote, finished. Then and only then do I send it on for an approval. Looking at it from SharePoint's perspective, we've also been building out more and more scenarios where we're making use of flow to deal with everyday productivity challenges so that you don't even have to think about building an approval flow. One of the things that we've introduced over the past year is an in-the-box flow called Request Sign-Off, which uses the Flow approvals engine. But if you say, I have a document and I've finished all the editing, and I want to route it to some people to have them give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, it's a lightweight approval engine. I don't even have to build a new flow. It will set that up in the library for me. And anytime I route one of these documents for a sign-off, it'll track the status. It'll show me it's pending. It'll show me what the feedback is. And people will get alerts, and they can go directly inside Flow, or they can go to SharePoint, or they can receive it through email, get exposed to the document, and give feedback. And the Flow engine will manage that process all the way forward.
So you've mentioned templates a lot. Obviously, it's a great place to start. Some are very simple. Remind me, send a review and approval through. But if I get a template, whether I grab it, that's not out of the box, or I use one that's actually, in the service already, talk a little bit about how I can customize those. So I might want to just tweak a few things. When I go do that, what's the experience? I start with a template and then customize. What's that process like?
So looking at a flow does not require writing code. I really think flow is something that just about every information worker can get into. A flow visually looks like colored blocks, a flow chart. And some flows are linear. They just go through step 1, step 2, step 3. And each box will show me the parameters that are used for it. For instance, the example I said before, if I open up that flow that might have come from template, it says when a new document is uploaded. If I open that up, it'll show me, well, here's the site and here's the library you're looking for. I might want to enrich that. So I might want to add conditions. So I could say, if the document title contains the word Teams, then send an alert to someone. And if it doesn't, do nothing. Or if it doesn't, then get an approval because we were supposed to be only doing things on Teams in this area. And then the subsequent blocks, you can add branches, you can add conditions, you can bring in other connections and other actions. So if you look at something like the SharePoint connector, you will see there are 50 or so things that I can do inside of it. I could generate a shareable link. Why would I do that? Because I might want to then send an email and put the shared link into it inside of the email. And just by filling out the dialog boxes inside of each of these color codes, you can customize the flow to be whatever it is that you need.
So when I go to customize the flow, it loads up in the web interface.
Yes.
And then I can continue to then make my choices. When I save everything I've gotten to customize what it is I want it to do, what and where am I saving that? And how does that either do or no longer interacts with the template, or have I taken over the template?
So it's a great question. So if I start with a template, what I'm doing is I'm creating a brand new flow from that template. I'm not making changes to the template. It's my own copy. I can do what I want freely without stepping on everyone else's toes. If I think the flow that I've come up with is really useful, I can also then export it and import it and attach it lots of different places. If I have a 3-step approval process and I want to use it on 30 libraries and I don't want to rebuild it in every location, I can just create one, export it, and then attach it to each of those 30 libraries.
So once we've got kind of that foundational element of really what a flow is, why are we building it, obviously hearing from Miceile all about lists, can you talk about the trifecta of putting together SharePoint lists and libraries with Flow and Power Apps, that sort of final mile of the whole, if we've got an orchestration engine, we've got a place for the data, where does Power Apps come in terms of that rounding out what we're offering?
So Power Apps, Flow, and Power BI actually share the same connected framework, and SharePoint participates in those. So I can actually build a Power App in the same framework to talk to the same data sources. I could introduce buttons inside of there. I can wire those buttons up to automatically trigger a flow. So I might expose all the data from inside of a SharePoint list into a Power App. And when I look at one line item on there, say upcoming picnics, I might have a button in there saying send alert to team, and that button will trigger a flow which is built somewhere else. All of which is done, you may have to fill out some boxes or some pick lists, but there's no code that's required to do that.
I think it's some of the most important and exciting integration work that the team is doing. You know, we've done a lot of work with Exchange in the past, with smart links. We've done a lot of work, obviously, with mailboxes and where the documents are stored. We've done a lot of work, obviously, with the Skype team, and now, obviously, previously than that link with presence information and awareness on lists and libraries. But most currently, the integration with Flow and Power Apps, I think, is the most important integration work we've done in a long time.
It's really encouraging to see also how rapidly it comes. Some of the updates are to the connectors themselves. So over time, you'll see that we add more and more and more actions to the things that I can do inside SharePoint. One coming relatively recently is the ability to copy or move a file based on something that's happened somewhere else. The other thing is that over time, the Flow team itself is continuing to wire up, dozens and dozens and dozens of new services. On their blog at powerapps.microsoft.com, you will find a place where you can submit something. So if you're trying to connect to, widgets.com, and it's really popular, but no one has built a connector for widgets.com yet, if we see enough customer interest in it, we'll go build that connector. Developers have the option, if Microsoft hasn't published a connector for it, for publishing their own connection. So we see some of our partners have built connections into their services. Companies like Adobe, who have signature products and DocuSign, they've built their own connections so that you can plug into Flow. If you think about it, there's already 240, 250 services inside of there. If I build a connection from my service, and if, say, my service just allows me to order pizzas from Frank Pepe's in New Haven, I'm instantly getting connected not just to SharePoint, but to hundreds of other services behind there. So if I build a process that integrates something in Google or something in Box or something in Salesforce, I can still, through the Flow framework, get to my pizza ordering system.
And it's okay if I customize your Pepe flow so that every time you order a pizza, it actually gets delivered to my house.
If you make a copy of it and you're willing to put your credit card in, I'm all for it.
Oh, no, I think your credit card's just fine, Chris. So we're pretty current on Flow, obviously integration points, and really what is it. But let's get the most current that we can. There's a lot of new features within this last couple of weeks that have been released either by us or by the Flow team. And I think there's 4 key ones. The first one is Remind Me emails. As simple as that sounds, it's gotten a really good reception from our sort of immediate audience through the tech community. But just talk about sort of why reminder emails are now there and what they do for our users.
Sure. So dates are a pretty common column type that we have throughout SharePoint on lists and libraries. And it may be the date, the planned end date for a document.
Deliver this pizza to Mark by Friday.
Right. And so anytime we see a date value in a SharePoint list or library, I can add a reminder flow for it. And that process is, again, this is personal productivity for you. And you're saying, how many days in advance of this date do I want to get an email? And so you say, I want to be reminded 1 day in advance, or 3 or 7 or 14 or what have you. And then as the data is added and changed over time, I'm going to get a reminder for any of the items in that list, 1, 3, 5, 7, whatever number you choose. I'll get that email with a link to that information in advance.
Very nice. So we've already talked about this next one a little bit. So I think in addressing what we do with review and approval, maybe just walk people through when I'm in a library, how can I create or use the review and approval workflow? What's the clicks, a couple of steps?
So one of the best examples is what we've done for the Pages library. We talked about documents before, but Pages in SharePoint are an essential repository that allows me to customize user experience, and it's also the way that I deliver news. Some organizations really want news to be widely shared and widely distributed. Other organizations, especially for things like organizational news, want there to be some standards and controls around it. We want to make sure that only approved news gets seen and published. So the way that I used to be able to do some of these things in classic on-premises SharePoint by manually setting up some approval processes and reconfiguring the library. Here's how that works now. I go into that Pages library, and I hit Flow in the menu bar, and I pull down Configure Page Approval. I get a dialog. It asks me, who should approve changes to this library? And that's all that you need to do. Once you enter that value, the system will automatically configure the library so that all proposed changes are proposed changes that live in the pending status. And when people save them, they can no longer publish. The button is now a submit for approval, which will trigger a flow process to the people that I enter who receive that on their mobile device, in their email, through the web, and they can see this is something that should be approved or rejected. The page author can also directly in line click for status and see what the current status is of the request. Flow will manage all steps of the process throughout.
Well, the next one's kind of a big one, and I'm just going to state it very simply. What are we doing with Flow and Microsoft Teams?
It's a great question. So one of the key things that we've brought forward is with all of this document and data that we have inside of libraries and lists and being able to bring them into Teams, we have a unified view of the processes that I can drive through Flow from the command bar that shows up inside of the tab inside Teams. So we've made it as simple as possible for me to add a list or add a page as a tab to any channel inside Teams. And the reason why we've made that simple is it brings along all the Flow integrations in its wake.
And that's really the proof point number 20, 30, whatever we've been talking about over the course of this particular episode and past ones, that when you bring a SharePoint element into Microsoft Teams as a tab, it is the full power of SharePoint, whether it's page, news, lists. You shouldn't think of them as, I'm in Teams, so I can't do X or Y like I think I should be able to do. But with something as powerful as Flow, you should be able to start a flow on a list item right from within inside Teams.
Right.
Cool. So last thing is HTTP connections.
That's a great one. So I mentioned before there's a couple of dozen things and actions that are already pre-built for you inside of the SharePoint connector, things like generate links or copy files. There might be something that you can do in SharePoint today interactively that doesn't show in that drop-down list. So HTTP connections gives us a way to let me go beyond that published list of actions. So let's suppose that what I really wanted to do is change the compliance label on a document. Now, we don't have that as a drop-down yet, but so long as I know exactly what HTTP syntax I need to use to invoke that, I can use that to allow me to add additional custom actions without having to wait for Microsoft to wire them up.
Very nice. Sounds like taking business solutions even further. Never wait for Microsoft. You should always value what Microsoft offers. Know that we will continue to work on a ton of high-value, high-scale type scenarios, but you should also feel empowered to customize to your heart's content.
So I just wanted to thank you, Mark, and me, Chris, for having me on the show today.
Thank you, Chris, for coming and being our expert. You are not allowed to leave, though, because we have another segment to talk about events that are coming up, but thank you for everything that you've shared with Flow.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Chris.
So frequently asked questions. We get a lot of frequently asked questions. They're frequently and they're asked, and we love that they are both. And of course, throughout all of our speakers, MVPs, internal engineering, marketing, we get a lot of questions. And I love that people step up to provide the answers. So what's your most frequently asked question in this space or wherever that Miceile gets questions?
Absolutely. The most frequent question that I love getting now is around large lists, where I get a lot of questions saying, well, what happens after I have 5,001 items? And I love to be able to respond with the answer that we have done a lot of work in the last few months, even the last year, to make sure that that 5,000 limit is no longer existing. And so it's a really awesome question to get, because we can say, well, actually, we have predictive indexing. And, once you get to 20,000 items, everything works seamlessly. And if you want to go to 30 million items, you do these two things and it still works seamlessly. And so the question's always, when's that limit going to be taken away? And it's really exciting to say that it's gone. It should no longer limit you in your list usage.
And the real part of the clarity there is that we've addressed the issue where people saw the error, but there's never been a real limit of how many items. It's the view when you're actually using the list. It was when you had a view that returned more than 5,000 items.
Exactly.
So I know you all have some amazing limits, and that felt limiting. And of course, that you've taken away the limits in terms of the views, really, like you said, creates a better story today, a better answer.
Exactly. And everything works as you expect now in those views with so many items in there, which is really awesome. I mean, the goal is to have no one even notice that they have a list with 6,000 items.
So is that the only question you get? You give these talks about all the new features and functionality, and they still ask about the 5,000 limit.
They still ask about the 5,000 limit. It's a question I get all the time. I get emails about it, and I'm super happy to always answer it and let people know to go out and try all the new stuff that we've been building and send them videos of the demos we've done so they can check it out.
But is that your only question?
I get another question, not nearly as frequent, but it's one that I've been getting a lot recently, and that is centered around list templates and what our story is around there. And with the list templates, where we get questions on what is the web part going to support all the list templates, when are list templates going to be completely modernized. And so I'm really excited to announce that we will be 100% rolled out with the web part supporting all list templates, probably by the end of the month. And then for the most common one I get asked about is task lists. And the answer that we always have that's great to get people aware of is the integration that we're doing with Planner and making sure that people know they have access to Planner and knowing that that is a really powerful task management tool, and getting feedback on ways that Planner can eventually be the task list and ways that can actually be more useful to people. So I get asked on the list templates a lot, and I always love kind of answering it in pieces, right? Where when you see them coming to the modern world, when you see them coming to the web part, and then ways that we actually want to improve the old list templates with things such as the task list.
Well, I know I'm going to be using that line. The new task list is Planner.
Exactly.
And by the way, is integrated with SharePoint.
Yes, exactly.
Great questions, great answers. Chris, what is your FAQ this week?
The question I get asked a lot is, when is all of this flow integration coming to lists in the classic view? And the answer is they're not. We have no plans to introduce flow integration into the ribbon inside of a classic view of a list. I can still build a flow and have it be triggered on new values in the list. And regardless of whether someone's in classic or modern mode, they're going to still be able to have that automation flow. But being able to inline, build the process, monitor the process, all of those integrations, those are only in modern. Mark, I know there's a couple of questions you've had.
Yes, so my question this week, and I've sort of done it to myself and certainly with your help in this new bonus episode we call the Roadmap Pit Stop. The question that's come the most out of that on comments on the blog or just people reaching out to me is, well, when is it available to me? I see there's a lot that's been released this month, but maybe I don't yet see it in my tenant. So it's really hard to know per tenant. We don't have that just yet. But I wanted to take a moment to at least give the answer that I've been giving, which is to explain our release cadence. We certainly build and test it internally. Nobody will see that. We release it to our own tenant, which we call MSIT. Once it's released there and validated by our internal users as the guinea pigs for the whole world, we then start to release it in what we call targeted release. And targeted release has some steps in it. released 10% of targeted release, 50, 100. And that's usually within a 2-week time period. So once we've released a targeted release, you can expect it if you're in the targeted release program within about 2 weeks after we announce that it's moving out into production. And then for broader production beyond targeted release, we release in that same cadence, 10%, 50%, 100%. It's a much bigger corpus of people and companies, of course, so that might take a little bit longer. And we typically roll out to full production in that cadence in about 2 to 4 weeks. And then the final mile is really a big question that I get is, well, when is it coming to me? I'm a government customer on the GCC instance. And our best way that we can say it in a broad way is after we released a targeted release and broader production, then it goes to GCC. Sometimes it's in parallel, but primarily after we've announced something's rolling out, it's about 6 weeks to 8 weeks for when it comes to GCC.
And in case you're wondering, how do I become one of the favored customers that Microsoft targets with its initial releases? It's not up to us, it's up to you. You can opt your tenant in to be part of targeted release, and you will get our production code sooner than everyone else.
That's right.
So thanks for joining us for the FAQs. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more of your questions about Microsoft events.
Let us put our binoculars on the future from an events perspective. There are always a ton of SharePoint events across the year, and we want to talk about things that are immediately coming up and certainly things that you should be planning for to visit in the near future. So first, with SharePoint Saturdays, these are great ways to connect up with a lot of other people in the community. There's a lot of content focused on end users for ITs and developers, and the best thing about SharePoint Saturdays, they're free. Free as in free as a bird.
100% off.
100% off. If you use a special code INTROZONE, you will get free entrance into all SharePoint Saturdays. Let them know that Chris and Mark sent you. Thank you. So the next ones that are coming up, February 2nd, there's going to be one in Bremen, Germany. That's northern Germany.
And on February 9th, we have a three-fer. Three cities. Chennai
nice.
in India, Salt Lake City in Utah, great for skiers, and also Hyderabad in India.
Very nice. So if you go to spsevents.org, you'll see all the upcoming SharePoint Saturdays near you and encourage you in the next couple weeks to visit those that we mentioned.
Also coming up in the new year, this year, 2019, our biggest SharePoint event, SharePoint Conference, SPC 19, May 21st to 23rd at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas.
Yeah, we've got a lot going on there. Definitely follow on Twitter. Go to the site. There's a lot to learn about why you'd want to go. And once you commit to it, we'll be pumping a lot of information on what to expect on that day. We'll put the registration code sharepointna.com. And the hashtag to follow is hashtag SPC19.
So Jeff Teeper in his executive keynote with the rest of the team will have real news to come out this year. We have smaller news that we'll bring forward in the podcasts, but this will be big things. You could be the first in the world to see it.
Yeah, this is where we really release what it is we're working on for the next 6 months after May. So come and hear it from Jeff, ask your questions, meet with the experts, learn from MVPs, learn from Microsoft speakers. There's a ton going on, including all the fun stuff that isn't just the learning. There's always lots of great things to do in the evenings and the mornings. Whatever your heart's desire, SharePoint Conference has it.
Another event we want to make sure you register now with our 100% discount code, Ignite the Tour.
Also free and free again.
Our next two stops for the Ignite Tour, Tel Aviv, Israel, January 22nd to 23rd, and Milan, Italy, January 31st to February 1st.
And if you go to the site for Ignite the Tour, you'll see there are about 17 cities that are listed. I think we've already gone to maybe 2 or 3 of them by the time this podcast goes live. So there have been a few. There are, of course, these couple coming up, but there's a lot throughout the year and throughout the entire world. So definitely check to see where the Ignite Tour is coming close to you. Same as SharePoint Saturdays, free, a lot of the same value. The biggest difference between the two is you'll get a lot of information beyond SharePoint and Office because the Azure team also goes to the tour, and there's a lot of information around what we're doing with Dynamics, Azure, and Office. Ignite the Tour covers a lot of content.
Back here in the States in February, SP TechCon. SPTechCon.com hosts one of the longest-lived SharePoint events that we've seen here in North America, and of course, I'll be keynoting this year's event, so hope to be able to see you there.
Excellent. Well, go bug Chris and make him answer the tough questions. I'm going to let you cover this next one because I think it's really up your alley.
The AIM Conference, San Diego, March 26th to 28th, covering all things relating to content services, records management, compliance, and enterprise content management. You can learn more and register now at aimconference.com. Microsoft will be there with a big presence, of course, and I hope that they somehow are able to, in late winter, convince people to stomach having to spend a week in San Diego.
Oh, it sounds really, really tough. I'm really sorry for you. It's also a great way, if you heard our previous podcast all about what we're doing with content services, you heard Chris, you heard from Ian's story, and they'll both be there, of course, along with John Mancini and Cheryl. And if you liked what they had to say, let them know, and then, of course, keep asking them questions at the AIM conference. Further in the year, on April 29th through May 3rd, is the next SharePoint Fest, which will be in Washington, D.C. You can register at sharepointfest.com/DC. And then towards the end of the year...
Let's check this one off.
Towards the end of the year...
ESPC, December 2nd to 5th, coming for the first time ever to Prague.
Yeah, I'm really jealous. If I can't make it, I'm super jealous. I'm super happy if I can make that one. So I'm definitely checking that on my calendar to see if I can join the European SharePoint experience in Prague. The team always puts on a really nice event. They always get great speakers. And of course, it's always fun to plug in beyond the United States to see how the international community is going with SharePoint. So you have made it through another exciting episode of the Intrazone. We want to thank you for your ears, your time, and of course we want to thank our guest, Miceile Barrett, for sharing everything around SharePoint lists.
We encourage you to check out our show page for links of everything we've talked about today and more. Just visit us at aka.ms/theintrazone.
We love hearing from you, and we would love for you to send us your questions, your feedback, your hopes, your dreams. For us, either for the show or certainly we can transfer over to the SharePoint team if you have thoughts on the product. You can reach us via email at theintrazone@microsoft.com or via Twitter at SharePoint, at mcashman, or at cmcnulty2000.
Remember to rate, review, and tell all your friends about the show. If you personally want to take out an ad during the Super Bowl, we won't stop you. And subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
We thank you so much for listening. We're your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty. This has been The Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet.